Hello. Thank you for joining us on MD Prosperity Podcast, where we bring leaders, visionaries, and change makers, those who are about community investment and opportunity. Today, I'm Edwin Miller, the Chief of Housing Programs with the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust. Today is a great day. We have a true visionary, an institution here in Miami-Dade County, Mr. Ronald E. Frazier. I'm so honored you are here with us today, Mr. Frazier. I want to dive right in. Mr. Frazier, had to whip out a list here. You are a college professor, an architect, urban planner, chairman, CEO of BAC Funding Corporation, former bank board member, and owner of a construction company. Please share with our audience what gives rise to one having such a vast career in various disciplines.
Well, Ed, I guess I need to start from the beginning. I went to Howard University, graduated in architecture, and then went to the Catholic University of America and got an urban planning degree. So my career basically started in Washington, D.C. around 1967. I taught at Howard before coming to Miami. I came to Miami in, believe it or not, 1967, the summer of 1967, to work as an urban planner in the Model Cities program. And for those people who don't know what the Model Cities program, this is a federal program of the late 1960s and 70s. And the Model Cities area basically covered a part of Liberty City, Brownsville, and the sort of the western part of the unincorporated area. So that's how my career started here in Miami. And you talk about the various disciplines. Well, I used to teach at the University of Miami as well in the late 70s. But during the Model Cities program, I was able to, I guess, expand my abilities and get to know the community and those kinds of things. And I guess that's it in terms of how I reached all those different disciplines.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about the BAC Funding Corporation. What gave rise to our having that institution, the BAC Funding Corporation? Share with us its mission and what's on the horizon for the BAC Funding Corporation.
Well, the BAC was started after the 1980 riots, the McDuffie riots here in Miami. And what a lot of people don't know is that there were two organizations that were created out of that riot. The BAC Funding Corporation was the private sector's response, where over 1,000 business people put together a $6.8 million loan fund for us to provide loans and investments to the Black community. The public side was MD. MD was created at the same time, and MD was the public sector's response. So we were like brother-sister organizations at that point in time. But the basic mission of the BAC was to provide loans and investments to Black businesses and to sort of help them grow and develop over time. And over that, we've been in business continuously for 44 years. We were started in 1982, and we've been in continuous operation for 44 years. And I can say that a number of other nonprofits that were started around the same time sort of went by the wayside. We developed a couple of unique loan programs. And one of the things that we have learned over time is lending money is a hard business because people feel they don't have to pay it back type of situation. So what we've tried to do is to minimize, your FICO scores and all of that in terms of trying to determine whether a business is ready for a loan. So we set up the loan committee in such a way where the loan committee had to vote unanimously to approve a loan. You couldn't have any split votes. And I think that helped tremendously. That made the loan committee be a lot more proactive. And the other thing that we wanted to do was to have the business person make their own presentation to our loan committee, because we wanted to know whether or not they understood their business. So they could bring their lawyers and their accountants and business people, but those people couldn't talk to the loan committee, only that business. And that allowed us to see whether the person had thought the process through. Like I said, lending money is a very hard business. The number one thing that we learned at the BAC is that if a business had not paid its 941 taxes, then we wouldn't loan them any money, mainly because the IRS would come in and seize that money. So, you learn those things over time. Just to give you just a short story, over the first 20 years, what we learned about loaning money to businesses is that they fell into three categories. You had those business persons who had never been in business, and the product or the thing that they were selling or what have you was not a part of the general economy. And over a period of time, 2 or 3 years, no one wanted that product anymore, and they just simply faded out of business. The second group that we ran into were people who had worked in corporations. They had big salaries. They were managers and those kinds of things, and they wanted to go into business. Unfortunately, they had never missed a paycheck. Their kids were in college and what have you. So when they started their business, they wanted to maintain the same salary level, which you can't do. The business has to pay you what it's able to afford. So they just simply robbed the business in terms of cash flow to keep their lifestyle the same, and consequently, they went out of business. That third group was very sharp guys. They'd gone to business school and what have you, and they were able to put together very good performance and what have you. But their ultimate goal was to get the business running, let it develop a lot of cash flow, and in the middle of the night, take that cash flow and disappear. So that was the third group. So between those three examples, we began to learn how to really underwrite businesses and see who's sincere and who is not in those kind of situations. So that took like 25 years to understand that, though.
Understood. So, Mr. Frazier, as an architect, urban planner, even as a lender, you've been a part of making sure that there are a lot of landmarks in Miami-Dade County. Do you mind sharing some of the projects that you've put into place here in Miami-Dade County? And not just here in Miami-Dade County, if there are other areas, please share.
Yeah. I must say, to become an architect, man, was a long road. And what people have to understand is I became registered in 1972 in the state of Florida. In fact, I was the second registered black architect in the whole state. And you have to understand that where you have the kinds of governmental policies today, during that time, they didn't have those policies, So you didn't get the benefit of being a minority or what have you. And since there were no other black architects, even the people in government were white. So we had a hard time getting business. And during that early time in the early 1970s, black architects could only get work for buildings that were funded by the federal government. You could not do a project that was, say, funded by the city of Miami or Miami-Dade County. So you could see how they would separate us. And the other thing is that you couldn't get any projects unless it was housing, public housing, So the restrictions were pretty horrible at that point in time. So you had to learn how to maneuver and sell your business and do that kinds of things. And over time, I learned how to promote business and whatever. So some of those projects that I did very early was the Lindsay Hopkins WLRN radio facility. And I was the first black architect to get a project with the Miami-Dade County School Board, and that was done in 1970, 78. I did the state attorney's building downtown. I did the Joe Caleb Center in the Model Cities area. I did for the junior college, it's the educational facility on 62nd Street for the junior college. In fact, I've done a couple of those buildings. In Orlando, I was able to do one of the first crash fire rescue stations at Orlando Airport. Now, you're talking about some challenges now, like a fish out of water. I also did a project in St. Petersburg called the Enid Davis Center. And this was in the 1980s. And, and they looked at me like I had a tail kind of situation. Orlando, I also did the John Jackson Recreation Center, which was a historical person there, and we sort of did the building there. So I've done a number of buildings in North and South Florida. In terms of urban planning, which is what I loved in the beginning, when I worked for a firm called Kendra and Separate, I used to do a lot of communities, planned communities, and I would do those in the Northeast. So I've done work up in Buffalo, New York, and in Pennsylvania. So they used to fly me around during those times. So I gathered a lot of different kinds of experiences, and as a result of that, I used to apply that to dealing in the urban community, like the Model Cities program in Overtown and those kinds of items.
So you touched on your career as an urban planner. What do you see as it relates to development, redevelopment, and the historically black community nowadays? What are your thoughts on some of the changes in such communities?
Well, that's a soul-searching kind of question. I have sort of evolved over time, and being an urban planner and an architect, what I've realized is that the black community is just sort of disappearing, and there's no legacy left that we ever were there and that we ever accomplished anything. So what I've begun to get into now is trying to tell stories with buildings so that people understand that we were here and we were very successful. So I've been pushing that in a lot of the historical black communities, that you leave some kind of legacy, either in terms of a sculpture or something that said, we were here and this is what we accomplished, type of situation. And what I've decided to do is deal with it in called Afrocentric architecture, Afrocentric design. And some people look at me and say, what are you talking about? And I just said, you guys ever heard of the hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics? And you see all those symbols? Well, those symbols tell a story of the Egyptian culture. And they didn't understand that until they discovered the Rosetta Stone, that told them that when you look at all those different symbols, it was telling them historical facts about the Egyptians. So what I decided to do was to use the Adinka symbols and the Kente colors, because they all have meanings. And then I would put those in some kind of design, and that would begin to tell the story of black people, And when you learn what the symbol means, they talk about perseverance within able to hardship and what have you. So you can really write a story. When you look at the black community today, and because of my age, I remember what happened in the 60s when they were building a lot of public housing. And the black community became the dumping ground for all that public housing because nobody else wanted it. And what you're looking at today is the same process with a different name. When you look at what they're doing in the black community with the affordable housing, there's nothing wrong with the affordable housing, but because it's aimed at one income level, you don't have anybody that's able to spend any money. So they can't support any surrounding businesses because they don't have disposable income. So just think about looking down 7th Avenue at those new buildings and look at the ground floor. And the ground floor has no commercial. It's empty. Look at all of these buildings. And you say, why is the ground floor not occupied? And it's only in the black community. You go in some of these other areas, transit stations. I was driving down here always when I drive this way. I look at all the transit station development along US 1. I look at all the high buildings around. And we couldn't get any development around in transit stations in the black community. So it tells you that we're like the dumping ground, the experimental ground, and what have you. And when I talk like this, people look at me kind of strange and say, what were you trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that the black community is becoming holding patterns for future. So once they saturate this with all these buildings and the timeline runs out on the guidelines, you know, they have to keep them that way for 15 years. And after 15 years, you can change the rent structure. So what do you think is going to happen when they change that rent structure? We won't be there. We are slowly getting gentrified, and it's unfortunate, but collectively, I think we have to begin to look at these developments that are being proposed for our community and learn more about them. We end up finding about them when you see them come out of the ground. We don't see them when they are planning it and financing it and those kinds of things. So from my perspective, I see doom and gloom. Why? You know, we can't get any money from the banks to fund our projects, but the big developers can get money. Think about that. The banks have a new way of redlining. They tell you that this is the amount of rent that your project will support. And you can show them, no, people are paying X, Y, Z. Nope. We'll only give you money for 70% AMI. You know, that's the other way of redlining. So these are the kinds of things that I have run into, discovered over a period of time, and I try to make it knowledgeable. You know, sometimes I get a lot of pushback, and they look at me and say, "Oh man, that's just old man talking." I said, "Well, I used to be a young man. You know, when I went to Washington D.C., that's when a lot of urban renewal was happening in a lot of cities. Unfortunately, I was too young to know it. Georgetown used to be black. Southwest Washington, where all they have the HUD buildings, used to be black. You know, so look at history to tell you."
Wow, thank you. So, what advice would you give to a lot of the developers, the current developers that are operating in the urban core, and there are a lot of aspiring developers, some of which are nonprofits and churches and that sort of thing. Please share some words of wisdom for them in their development efforts. Please, sir.
What we learned at the BAC is that when you're a nonprofit organization, people look at you like you're a beggar because you got your hand out for donation or contribution. And when the BAC was formed, as well as MD in the 80s, the CRA programs for banks were a lot different. Banks were mandated to provide funds in these low and moderate income areas, you know, and under the CRA program. Not that they wanted to do it, but they were mandated to do it. That's why the BAC Funding Corporation and the black BBICs across the state became so profitable, because that's the way the banking laws were at that point in time. So it was easy for the bank to have a relationship with a nonprofit in terms of providing loans to them so they can put it out, because they couldn't put it out in those areas, type of thing. Well, in the 90s, the banking regulations changed, and banks got more conservative. So nonprofits were not able to get access to the funds anymore. And the larger nonprofits became like the gatekeepers, for the big money coming from the government. So you'd have to go to that gatekeeper in order to get a loan or any kind of assistance. So what we realized is that we had to become self-sufficient, because people still look at you with your hand, your head in your hand. So we came up with a new program called Sustainable Communities and Sustainable Wealth. And we figured that we had to become self-sufficient. And that's when we developed the MLK office building. Now, the MLK office building is more than just a public building. Everybody thinks the county owns that building, but BAC owns that building, But what people don't realize is that it's an economic machine. What we did was we made the management black, the janitorial services black, the groundkeepers black, certain repair people that have to come in are black businesses. So that building is feeding a community. Okay, that's just the business side of it. So you have black families that are benefiting from that because the businesses are local and what have you. So that business puts $2 million back into the black community a year. And that's what we call sustainable value. Not only does BAC benefit from it, from the ownership, we've made sure that local black businesses benefit as well. So I think that's the new model that nonprofits and small developers have to figure out how to become self-sufficient in terms of being able to fund their own projects, because it's very difficult when you get public funds. They have so many requirements. By the time you get through them, you don't even want the money anymore, type of situation. And the banks put so many other conditions on you in terms of the rents and the people that you can rent things to. You can't make any money there. So you're really going to have to sort of separate yourself from these institutions that we've gotten closely aligned with and begin to use our ingenuity again. I'm going to give you an example, and people look at me when I give them this example. They sort of look at me a little cross-eyed. I said, when you look at what has happened to black people over time, and you think about Reconstruction, and when we got out of slavery, we didn't have nothing. So these people had ingenuity, and you think about what they accomplished. And then you recognize, like, every 20 years, something happens to destroy whatever those black people have accomplished. And when you really go back and look at the race riots and what happened with Black Wall Street and Rosewood and the prosperity that those communities were at. Now, this is during Jim Crow. And what they destroyed the wealth as it relates to that. So, and then you have multiple generations which are not familiar with their history. So what I learned was this. Just pretend this table is a corral. And one day, a man came by and said, hey guys, you don't have to hunt anymore. You don't have to go in the woods. We're going to put all the cattle, all that stuff right there in that corral. And whenever you want to eat, you just go and get something out of the corral. I said, oh God, we don't need those guns and weapons anymore, It's going to be right there. That's called minority set-aside, disguised. Then one day the man comes back and said, God, can't corral those animals anymore. We got to let them run free. But you can still hunt them. We're not taking that away from you. You can still hunt them, but we just can't put them in that corral anymore. Then we looked at each other and said, what do we do? We have forgotten how to hunt. We gave away our guns and all our little stuff. We didn't teach the next generation, you need to learn how to hunt. Now you think about that. That's where we are today.
Wow.
We don't have any tools to hunt anymore because we have forgotten how to do that.
That's profound.
You know, and in order to overcome our situation, we got to go back and teach young people how to hunt. Jim Crow is on his way back, and nobody's experienced it. I have, because I grew up in Jim Crow. So half of my life, my first 18 years of life, was spent in the South, in Houston, under Jim Crow. And then in the 60s, I experienced integration, which I soon found out in the 80s was a big lie. You see? We got integrated, but the other people didn't. All of those black institutions, money, business, all disappeared, you know.
Understood.
So I think that we have to begin to educate our young people now that this is a new day. Young people are very educated, you know, but they're locked into instant gratification. That's a big problem.
I concur. Mr. Frazier, we're running low on time, but I want to know, so you have those various buildings that you mentioned you've developed in Chiwis. You've been lending and a part of banking boards and construction companies and that sort of thing. What is your legacy? How do you want to be remembered, Mr. Frazier?
You know, Ed, I'm trying to write my autobiography now, and
Good.
I'm running into that question every day as I try to write things and what have you. You know, I've spent my whole life pushing black business development, and a lot of people don't realize that. All the pressure I put on the school board when they had that bond program to make sure that black business and black contractors got a piece of that, you know. Now, I got punished a lot, but the other people didn't know that, you know. When the state or university system wasn't giving any work out to black architects, you know, I went up to the state and protested and what have you. And the head architect for the state came to me and put his arms around me and said, you ain't gonna get anything. We're gonna make sure everybody gets something but you. So, you know, I get punished for certain things. People don't understand that. But I have tried to make sure that opportunities for black businesses were done. The county CSB program, you know, I'm the master behind that. Because when they struck the set-aside program down, Commissioner Betty Ferguson came to me to help put in an alternative so that we could still do business under a category called small businesses, because we had to take the race out of it. And look what's happened. The race is being taken out of a lot of things. The last thing I'll say is that the first job interview I had for a project here in Miami-Dade County, I went before the selection committee, and, you know, I was 28 years old, and the county architect looked down at me and told me I wasn't qualified. And they told me that we don't want you to go away empty-handed, so we're going to give you a consolation prize. We want you to do these trash transfer stations over at James E. Scott Public Housing. This is in 1973. You know what those are? You ever seen the little concrete, 4-foot high concrete C-shaped wall?
Yes.
That's what they gave me.
Okay.
Okay? And I said from that day, I am going to plan my life in 5-year cycles. It's going to be like going into war. I'm going to do my research on whoever the adversary is to make sure I understand the game that I'm in, so I am prepared. The school board and that first project that I was awarded, they turned that commission down twice. I had to be reselected twice. So,
Well, Mr. Frazier, can't thank you enough for joining us today for MD Prosperity Podcast. This has truly been amazing. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience has learned a lot. Thank you so very much.
and thank you, Ed. I appreciate it.